14 through 20. So let's take a look at this. Heather, why don't you read for us, beginning in verse 14.
When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me, you may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt, in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, approved by the Levitical priests. And it shall be with him, and he shall read in it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel.
Okay, now there's some criteria here. So there's some quality standards, or some standards of quality control that Moses lays out for the people with regards to the king, and just some certain things that we want to make sure we grab. And verse 14, I will set a king over me when the people say, I want to set a king over me like all the nations who are around me, you shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses. So there's a subtle hint there. Setting a king like the nations. The people, if they're in a situation where we want a king, but we want a king like all the nations around us, that's going to be really, really a key verse that we come back to in 1 Samuel chapter 8, when Israel selects Saul. Because Saul is selected on their criteria. We would like a king to serve us like all the nations. And that ends up being a rebellious, motivated request. But then the Lord's going to select the king. So then that helps us to understand the transition to Samuel finding King David, because David's a king that the Lord chooses, not who the people choose. So just giving us a little advance notice there. Moreover, and then we have some interesting descriptions. So multiplying horses for himself. What is it that a king in Israel shouldn't be a horse lover, or not like to go to the Kentucky Derby of his day, or what do we got going on here?
Is it going to be like an army, warriors?
Yeah, military building. You multiply horses. It's a phrase that focuses on the building of a military. No king in Israel should be about building the biggest army around. Why? We know the answer, don't we? Does Israel need the biggest army around to win the battles? If the battles are fought God's way, right? So, yeah, kings can build the biggest army around, but that's the pagan way to do things, not God's way of doing things. So, the building of a big army. Verse 17, he shall not multiply wives for himself, lest his heart be turned away. Uh-oh. That sounds like one king is going to be coming along pretty soon. So, building wives, of course, kings can have multiple wives, and we see examples of that. There's kind of a biblical way for that to happen and a not biblical way for that to happen. One of the things that seems to be biblical through the patriarchs and then again into the kind of the patriarchs of community, aka kings, is to ensure a dynasty, to protect and essentially have an insurance policy. Maybe there are, kings are entitled to have many sons, so that if some tragedy happens, there's always got to be a son who can take that first son, firstborn privilege to become the next king, in terms of preserving, and that's a benefit for the society at that point. I know that gets controversial in terms of multiple wives, but in that particular context, that seems to be the ongoing practice. I think for the household, there's probably I think that merges into one wife, one husband. in terms of providing for sons for the household. But for a king, there's a little bit more at stake. But what we see here is really not about that at all, I don't think. Multiplication of wives. And this comes from any Israelite king who sees it necessary to enter into covenant relationships with other countries and other nations. So treaty making, whenever that happens, there's an exchange of women or daughters, oftentimes as a way of solidifying the deal. The exchange of women happens king to king when they enter into treaty relationship with one to another. That's what happens. So Solomon was really good at that. He accumulates a lot of women because he's out there making treaties. He's being this politician, this diplomat, this world politician out there. That's what Solomon's good at. So, and with pagan nations. So these pagan women then come in and do exactly what this verse says. See? So kind of it's wrong on two counts. So treaty making, why is that not to be the case for an Israelite king? How many treaties should they be involved in? One. Yeah, good. You got that. All right, good. Last, we've got the accumulation of gold, verse 17. Well, that's pretty straightforward, because the accumulation of gold means that probably attached to that is a heart that's getting way too prideful and boastful. And when you have a lot of gold, you have to become a sitting duck, and you set yourself up for conflict with other nations that want to come in and rob you and create war because they're after your gold. Brings a lot of extra attention to yourself, which of course would be Solomon's demise with inviting the whole world to come in and see how much gold he has. The Queen of Sheba who comes in and all of that. But also, probably more importantly, is this. You're taxing your people. You're creating an interruption in the economic balance. You're putting an undue, unnecessary burden on your people by accumulating gold. Gold for who? Not for the people, for the government. Wow, there's a lot that we can say about this in terms of our modern situation, our taxation situation, you know. Kings can have some gold, but not that much gold, you know. There's a balance, and we'll evaluate King Solomon through this lens when we get there. He was given the gift of wisdom, but how he applied it is the question mark, you know. And sometimes he went a little bit too far. In fact, all of these things he was involved in. But probably the most important thing is that the king, in verse 19 we see, well, beginning in verse 18, when he sits on his throne, he shall write for himself a copy of this Torah on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priests. The king should know the law. He should know the Torah. He needs to be a walking billboard of what covenant relationship looks like as it's expressed in an individual. David was like that for his kingdom, and Solomon was like that to a degree with his kingdom. He wrote down some pretty significant works, Proverbs, Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes. He left us some good corpus theological material for his kingdom. All those books came near the end of his life, except for Proverbs. I think Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon were near the end of his life. Kind of after, like, looking at his own life, saying, look how many mistakes I made. I don't want you to make these same mistakes. But he should be active in learning the Torah and figuring out ways of expressing Torah in the workaday world of the community. Now, David, he was a songwriter, right? He wrote songs, and he captured theological truth in the songs that he wrote for the worshiping church of his day. That's kind of cool, to be a king and to be that influential. He was actually the one king I know who was doing this. So he's carefully observing the words of his law, even though he made mistakes. He made a pretty big mistake, but generally the trajectory of his life, that his heart may not be lifted above his countrymen, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right or to the left, in order that he and his sons, which is probably the difficulty of having the kingdom continue, may continue long in his kingdom in the midst of Israel. So this is a kind of the evaluation text that will have the theological criteria that the authors, the theologians who write Samuel, 1st and 2nd, and Kings, 1st and 2nd. All the way up the history that takes us to the end of the exile, the collapse of Israel in the north, and the exile of Judah in the south. Every king will be evaluated by this criteria. This is huge. And it's interesting that even if we go back to our previous conversation, the author of Judges, who's writing during this monarchy time, taking that 400-year period and trying to figure it all out theologically, he's trying to say, we really failed if we forgot God, I would say. What are we supposed to do? What kind of king do we need? A king like Deuteronomy 17, I think that's correct and accurate, but not many kings like that come along. So I think the prophets who come along next that start trying to figure out their situation, they're going to start to anticipate a different kind of king, a God-man king who will come down and will come on the scene and make things right. So that's what my little chart here kind of talks about. God as king is where it all starts. We see that the image of God bearing, the assignment that was given to the first image of God bearers, is an expression of the idea of God as king. We are little kings, and now Israel as a nation is corporate expression of that same kind of idea, as an extension of the kingship of God. All of that's going to anticipate the future king who will come and reestablish the very first blue bubble there all over again. So this is an interesting cycle of kings, the idea of kingship and the monarchy and how it all fits in. You've got kind of a, we go back to this, right? The divine reality, earthly expression. So, divine reality is that God is king, and how he wants his divine reality of his kingship to be expressed on earth is our job. Israel's a nation, Israel's individual members of the faithful remnant, but the earthly expression. And if it's not happening here, this line here reminds us that it eventually will in God's ultimate solution. That they have the Lord and some of those things that we saw in Zechariah 14. God is king. There's just one king. So that it'll all come back to that eventually. All right. Let's move on here. What about the laws of warfare? Now we get into some sticky wickets here. And this is the Dawkins quote that I keep alluding to. You remember that? We watched the video clip out of that movie with Ben Stein and what was that called? Expelled. Yeah, Expelled. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, petty, unjust, unforgiving, control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, misogynistic, homophobic, racist, I can't even read it. I might get struck by lightning. I wish Richard Dawkins had been struck by lightning when he came up with that in his book, God Delusion. But this is these guys have a heyday with this stuff. And they go back, and it's easy for them to pull a text out, right? And parade it around like it's the tell-all and end-all to who God is. And they really, exaggerate. They exaggerate their misrepresentation of the God that we know from the Bible. And what we need to do is help our people understand some of these passages where these guys get their ammunition comes from in the context, and help our people understand how to address these, water cooler conversations that they have probably every other day with the people they work with. The guy was emailing me last week about that. He says, I took something out of your class, and I had lunch with one of my coworkers who pinned me on the spot out of the blue, asked me, I don't believe that the God of the Old Testament is the same as the God of the New Testament. What do you think? He asked that question, and he said, I was able to remember a few things that you talked about in class and helped him a little bit, and he wants to meet again. So I was like, wow, that's good stuff. So, but the warfare text, let's take a look at this in chapter 20. I could show this video clip. It's one of the best fighting video clips out of Gladiator. I could be a geek and show it, but I'm a little behind. Oh, yeah, maybe I will. All right. This is a great video clip. I just got to show it.
Will they fight something?
Soldier, I order you to move those catapults forward, out of range.
Registered.
The danger to the cavalry.
Is acceptable. Agreed.
And here come the pagans.
People should know when they're conquered.
I like that one. That's why I picked this clip. What happened? I think it's just catching up with itself. Maybe I can't do this. It might come back. Everything's still good with that? Okay. Well, let's look at this, and maybe this will come back. I don't know why it's bogging down here. But chapter 20, and that one line that comes out of that, at least we heard that. People should know when they're beaten or defeated. All along and everywhere along until we get to this place, the Lord has reminded His people, I've got the battle, I've got your back, I'm going to fight this battle, and if you fight it my way, on my terms, you'll have victory. And we have a little bit of the details of the laws of warfare, beginning in verse 1. When you go out to battle against your enemies and see horses and chariots and people more numerous than you, then you need to turn around and run the other direction. No, it's not what it says, sorry. Let's have another repeat of Kadesh Barnea. No, it's not what it says. Don't be afraid of them. Joshua's going to say, be strong and be courageous, for the Lord your God, who brought you up from the land of Egypt, is with you. Oh, He's the one who's got our back. Am I scaring you away? Sorry. All that battle scene. Now, it shall come about that when you are approaching the battle, the priest shall come near and speak to the people and shall say to them, Hear, O Israel. There's another repeat of the Shema. You are approaching the battle against your enemies today. Do not be faint-hearted. Don't be afraid or panic or tremble before them. Again, for the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to save you. The officers also shall speak to the people, saying, Who is the man who's built a new house and has not dedicated it? Let him depart and return to his house, lest he die in the battle, and another man has dedicated it. There's a provision for the household structure. So the first-ranking head of household who's out on the battlefield, if he's in a situation that he feels his household could be put at risk, he can go back. Why? Well, that's going to limit the number of troops on the battlefield. But you know, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because the Lord's going to win the battle. See? So this is you see the intertwining here of the protection of the household structure, which I think is so foundational to the whole book of Deuteronomy, even in terms of how the battles are to be fought. Now we keep going. And who is the man who has planted a vineyard and has not begun to use its fruit? Let him depart and return to his house, lest he die in the battle, and another begin to use his fruit. And who is the man that is engaged to a woman and has not married her? Let him depart and return to his house. Then, verse 8, the officers shall speak further to the people and say, Who is the man who's afraid and faint-hearted? Let him depart if he's just having a bad day, so that he might make his brother's heart melt like his heart. We only want the soldiers out here who are ready to fight. That's the point. And are ready in all the aspects. And it shall come about that when the officers have finished speaking to the people, they shall appoint commanders of armies at the head of the people. When you approach a city to fight against it, you shall offer terms of peace. Let's just pause and reflect on that. And you could have said it like the guy in the Braveheart movie. So people should know when they're defeated. Let's offer them terms of peace and see if they've gotten that message. Maybe they've heard of the reputation of our God in advance of our arrival, and they are ready to give up. Because what happens next for them? And that shall come about, if it agrees to make peace with you and opens to you, then it shall be that all the people who are found in it shall become your forced labor, your servants and slaves, and become assimilated into the household structure. So they're going to be brought into the economy as, I would argue, positive contributors to the Israelite economy. I mean, we see the word slaves there, but in the context of or forced labor, but there's going to be opportunities for them to assimilate in to the Israelite economy and contribute. And there was provisions made for them. Only after all of that do we have the battle that starts. And then there's going to be loss of life on the battlefield. Both Israelite soldiers will die, as well as the pagan armies who they battle after that. And then there's a lot of emphasis after that on how, and we've heard this before in some pretty severe language, how the paganism that's in the land will be dealt with and utterly driven out. So we know this because we've been given some advanced warning, and I'll just reiterate this briefly, of the kind of paganism that was in the land. So if we go back to Leviticus, even before they get to the land, you've got Moses warning them. This is the kind of well-entrenched paganism. Chapter 20, verses 1 through 5. In Leviticus, say to the sons of Israel, any man from the sons of Israel or from the alien sojourning in the land who gives any of his offspring to Moloch shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I'll set my face against that man and will cut him off from amongst his people, because he's given some of his offspring to Moloch, so as to defile my sanctuary and to profane my holy name. I mean, we don't live that close to this kind of paganism. I suppose if you've been in certain parts of the world, you might have gotten a little closer. But even in this kind of form, I think paganism is, I've said this before, alive and well, even in our community, in our context. There's a whole list of verses I give you in the speaker notes on paganism and how it's expressed. If we turn to where this all goes, eventually down the road in Israelite history, if we turn ahead to like 2 Kings chapter 16. Now we're in the divided kingdom, 2 Kings 16. And this author is evaluating a period of time during the divided kingdom. 2 Kings 16, verse 3. Well, I'll start in verse 2. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. And he did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord his God, as his father David had done. But he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, the northern kings, and even made his son pass through the fire, according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord had driven out from before the sons of Israel. And he sacrificed and burned incense on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. Where does this all go? If Israel doesn't do the job early on and accomplish what the Lord had specified for them to do, then we get into a pickle. We get into a situation like this with unconquered paganism is showing up, and it's stronger than ever. And it's in the Israelite camp. And it's impacted kings who are paying homage to these pagan gods by sacrificing their own sons, thinking that they're doing the kingdom a favor, granting or inviting in the favor of the little g gods, not Yahweh. So this is the battle, and the battle is early, and we'll see it next week. We'll finish up Deuteronomy next week, and we'll get into Joshua and talk about the battle. But the battle is going to be fought in the Lord's way. And we know these points. Point 1, the victory is his. And we see that in verses 2 through 4 in chapter 20. The battle is for soldiers who are ready and not distracted. We saw that in verses 5 through 9. The battle is only for a city who rejects the terms of peace. Verses 10 through 12. Grace. Grace is extended to women, children, and livestock. Verses 14 through 15. And the reality of this entrenched paganism, verses 16 through 18, needs to be driven out and addressed. And that's the whole reason for the spiritual battle that's taking place. And only then we have the detailed language of the utter destruction in verses 19 and 20. All right, so let's just move on and we'll finish today with some of this idea. We'll just keep going on with this instruction. I don't know, I throw this in, maybe I shouldn't, but it's just some of the stuff that we're dealing with in our culture. And I think behind paganism, there's this trend that we see. Paganism has a tendency to redefine things and water things down and put new definitions on things and to confuse some of the basic biblical principles that we see with regards to, definitions for the household structure, definitions for sexual orientation and roles and relationships, and all of these kinds of things. So paganism is alive and well in our culture. We see some of these trends, and we might have an interesting discussion this week on how we all think these things are going to be coming around the pipe to start attacking church structures through pressure that the government will put on us with regards to tax exemption that'll be linked to some of these things. We may lose our buildings because we can't pay the taxes on the $5.5 million building and land that we own, and all of a sudden we're having to pay taxes on that, which we've never had to do before. We don't have budget for this. How is this going to happen? So it could be a mess. We just don't know, do we?
The Lord will provide.
The Lord will provide.
Yeah.
Let me challenge, though, at this point, along the trajectory of all that we've been talking about, let's turn to Isaiah chapter 3. And this is something that encouraged me recently in the Isaiah chapter 3. Isaiah is one of those prophets. He's got the same challenge of any of the prophets that we read. He's got a faithful remnant group that need to be encouraged. He's got the majority of the unfaithful who need to be called on the carpet with regards to their sin, and a call to repentance for all of you. Sorry, you're still on the wrong side of the room. Oh, we've got this group of 4 over here, the faithful remnant. You guys need to hear this. So here's an example of Isaiah 3. And pretty early on in his prophetic ministry, he says in verse 10, here's what you should say to the righteous. This is the righteous remnant that he's addressing. That it will go well with them. For they will eat the fruit of their actions. But woe to the wicked, it will go badly with him. For what he deserves will be done to him. So what I do think is true as we move ahead into this our own current, present, modern, North American, spiritual, chaotic situation just around the corner, whoever becomes president. And you know what I can say? I think it's true that it doesn't even matter who the president's going to be. Really. Because we know that there's this battle going on. Why are we surprised by that? So how it moves ahead, while we don't know, things like this we do know, and we need to be encouraging our congregations this way. They're the righteous remnant. In fact, in our big churches, within our big churches, there's kind of the fringe folk, and within the church, there's the righteous remnant, the core. And our message to the core needs to be like the prophets. We need to be reminding them that God has a future for us. He's not given up on us. He's not forgotten us. And his promises that come to us through his word are as true today as they've ever been. And that's our way ahead. We walk by faith. We fight our battles against paganism like Joshua in appropriate ways. Not that we have to raise up an army against the government. I'm not proposing that, but it's just we have our ways of fighting this battle. But we recognize that the righteous remnant will emerge. And if persecution comes, like any other time in history, the righteous remnant will grow stronger and will become more refined and more pure like gold. And that always happens when this persecution knob gets turned up against the church, the righteous remnant within the church, the believing church. So these are the things I think we need to be about, encouraging the righteous remnant. That might be a good sermon title, encouraging the righteous remnant. There's all kinds of places in the Word that the authors of the Old Testament address the righteous remnant in their day with this kind of encouragement. Yeah, it's going to be hard, like what we saw in Deuteronomy chapter 8. You had 40 years in the wilderness, but look what happened, and look where you are now. You've emerged and you're ready to take the land. This is what your job is. You've come through this. Was it hard? Yes. Is it going to be hard? Yeah, pretty much it's always hard. But what is it true? What's always true is the Lord's always bent on cultivating this amongst His people. And you need to be thinking about this and reminding your people of what authentic faith looks like and how it's to be expressed in the midst of the difficulty that's probably coming in various forms. And we don't know all that's going to be yet, but we need to bank on what we do know, and that's the truth of God's Word. So with that, let's wrap up today. We'll pick up here with Deuteronomy and get into Joshua. And trust me, we'll get through all of the books, all the way through Ruth. I'm going to probably not lecture on some of the things you're covering in your reading textbooks, so I'm going to change things up a bit with more of a focus on just the books, the text of the Bible, as we finish out the semester. So more to come on that.